Hello, and welcome to a basic technical demonstration of the Matrix Eater Warcraft modeling software that I developed. The concept of the software I wrote here is pretty much based around editing existing Warcraft models. So, although I have other ways like file open that you can open a Warcraft model file, most of the time I start with the fetch function, which allows you to load a unit model or object editor data from the Warcraft 3 game installation on your computer, and it will look up the various units that exist within that Warcraft installation and present you with a list where you can choose one, and it'll open that character. Now we also see a checkbox here, Fetch Portraits too, which when it's enabled will fetch the unit character portrait. So without further ado, let's open a unit. If I click Unit right here, we see Choose Unit Type. It looks very much like the standard Warcraft 3 world editor, and you can choose a unit of your choosing. Today, let's open up the Footman. If I press OK, the software will load the Footman and the Footman's portrait in two separate tabs. It's one of the features of the Matrix Eater that it has multi-tabbed editing, so you can edit multiple 3D models at one time. And as we see here on the left, we have the View controller, which allows you to control which portions of a particular Warcraft model you're going to edit at a given time. Now, one of the handy things about this View controller, previous Warcraft editing software I had often was kind of clunky or difficult to use, and sometimes would restrict you to only edit a particular geoset of the Warcraft model at a time. So I was very careful when coding this software that I wanted to be able to edit all of the geosets at one time, and I also wanted to be able to basically pin some of them to be visible while I only edited one or the other. For example, you can make the character in this sort of ghosted blue state, as we see here, by me unchecking the editable box, so that only the character's body down there is still visible, and perhaps if you needed to tweak the body relative to the rest of the character, you could scroll down there, use the Select feature where you draw a box, and then Move, Rotate, or Scale, which activate on right-click. So if I click Move, I can right-click to move there, and edit in a particular way. So that's a pretty basic feature to have. A lot of 3D model editors have basic vertex editing, similar to that. We've also got various like extend and extrude functionality. And when you do extend something like that, as you can see here in our little perspective viewer, it has not changed the current new vertices that I've introduced in the texture coordinates. So, not to fear, the Matrix Eater software here is well equipped also with a UV texture editor. So it opens up, you can click Load Image. As long as you click Yes, it looks in the Warcraft 3 installation and will find character textures that exist there. So you can pull up, for example, here I have the Footman's texture and the various points. Now when we look at this initially, I'm not too sure exactly what I'm looking at. Or maybe let's say I want to pull up the dead body texture that we saw there on the ground. Still a little bit hard to see what I'm looking at. But this has the nifty feature Select from Viewer, which will select specifically the vertices I had just created here in the actual model viewer and editor, which allows me to move that around, and we can see updating dynamically in real time on the character where that texture is. So if you were to create a character, maybe you're making the Footman into an elf, and if you made him taller, you could add more geometry into this dead body or something like that, and move around the texture and see the dynamic updates as you do so. Obviously, this also has your basic features that you would find in a texture coordinate editor, like the ability to wrap the image or change your aspect ratio as you're working, or mirror your coordinates and move things around. So most of that is pretty standard functionality. There are other fan-made Warcraft editing tools that exist out there in the world that do similar things to that. But I think the Matrix Eater's most prominent, unique functionality is its ability to blend Warcraft models. So in order to do that, I'm going to open up another model in a new tab, and we'll try to do a blend operation where we import one model into another based on something that I'll bring in another tab. To go along with this technical demonstration, instead of using the Fetch Unit function as I used before to get the Footman, this time let's use Fetch Model. This brings up the essentially a view identical to what you see in the Warcraft 3 World Editor, where you can scroll around and choose a Warcraft character or any other particular Warcraft model that you would prefer. Since we're just doing a technical demonstration, let's say that we wanted the Footman to have an animation within which he would become the Entangling Roots effect from Entangling Roots, the Night Elf ability. Makes no sense at all, but this will demonstrate the ability to bring one model into another model as a separate animation set. So we should be able to go to Buffs, and we'll find the Entangling Roots effect from Warcraft 3. Here we go. It comes right up. You can see the roots there in the viewer, and you can use the same. I'm using a mouse wheel click to pan around, or a left click to sort of spin my view. And I can press OK, and that'll open in a new tab. So now we have Entangling Roots. And now we sort of have a choice. Do we want to add Entangling Roots to the Footman as perhaps an alternate form, that he has the ability to turn into a mass of roots on the ground with a morphing spell, similar to the Druid of the Claw or Druid of the Talon? Or do we want the roots to be attached to the Footman permanently, baked into his model as a part of his animation? We can choose to do either of those, but in either case, we'll use the import function. So we'll have import here. Import's very similar to open file and fetch. It can let you choose a file on your hard drive, choose a Warcraft unit to import from, choose a model like the model viewer we saw, choose from the object editor, which basically is very similar to choosing a unit, or choose from workspace. So today we're going to choose from the workspace, and we'll choose our Entangling Roots model that we just loaded. We'll press OK on that, and it opens a window that is basically a description and with many, many options. There's a lot going on, but I'll try to talk through it here so we can understand. And basically it's going to try to combine those two models. And depending on what we click and what we choose at this point, before we click Finish on this import, it'll either introduce the Entangling Root Vines as a new animation inside the Footman, where all of that geometry is invisible in the normal Footman animations, and all the Footman geometry is invisible in the Entangling Root animations. Or you can stick the Entangling Roots onto the Footman's existing animations, so that he appears to have been entangled, regardless of what he does or where he goes. So our first tab here that we see while we're combining is the Geosets tab, which, as it says when I mouse over it there, controls which geosets will be imported. So within this tab, on the left side, you can click a geoset. It shows green if they're the Footman, green if they're already in the model, and orange if they're incoming. And when you click them, it shows this view here that shows the various textures. If I click on a texture, it actually will edit the model, and whatever geoset I have here on the left will use the selected texture when it is imported into the model. This means both that I could have the Entangling Roots be textured to look like a Footman, or I could go to the Footman and have the Footman be textured green, like the roots. In this case, you can always click Original for a particular set of geometry to go back to its original display. Let's keep the roots green and the Footman with his metal armor. Now I have animations. Now here we see the various animations of the Entangling Roots. I know for the untrained eye, at first you would think the Entangling Roots probably has one animation, right? With Stand, it's got some roots there. But actually there are these three sets of animations, the normal, medium, and large versions, which are obviously due to the attachment settings that you can have in the unit editor, whether your unit is a medium unit or a large unit in its attachment required animation names. So we see those here for our Entangling Roots model, and we can choose for every single one of these animations. Do we want to bring it directly into the Footman so that there will be a new animation in our custom model, or do we want to time scale it into a pre-existing animation? So in this case, let's keep our operation simple and say we're only going to take one of these animations. In order to do that, we can click Leave All, and if I click each of them one by one, now you can see it has automatically unchecked the box for Import this sequence. So we could do something simple. We could take Stand, and we could say, all right, the Stand animation, it's just the basic, the roots kind of looking like they're tying someone down. We'll have that time scale into pre-existing, and we can just click a Footman animation. So if we click this Stand 1 right here from the Footman, that'll say now the roots will animate within the Footman Stand 1 animation. So if we choose that animation, and that sets which Footman animation it'll blend into, you might wonder, can I choose multiple? And the answer is yes. You can control-click for additional animations, or shift-click for several at once. So in this case, let's just shift-click all of them, and say that we're going to have Entangling Roots grasping the Footman in all of his animations. Now if I go to Bones, you can clearly see here on the left, there's a little diagram that the program tries to show you, which is just a front view of the Entangling Roots model with the particular portion lit up in red that is controlled by a various bone in that entangling roots model. What each of these does, when I click on it, chooses how it will import. Are we going to take all of the bones of the entangling roots and put them into the footman? Or do we want portions of the footman's bone structure to move as though they were the roots and just bring the animation, translation, rotation, and scaling data onto the footman without actually introducing new animation nodes? We choose between those by using either import this bone, which brings it in as a new node in the node structure, or import motion to pre-existing, which will overwrite an element of the existing footman node structure. If we use import motion to pre-existing, it brings up the little diagram of the footman nodes, and you could choose, for example, maybe this bone cylinder 10 right here will be overriding the footman's right hand or something. In our case, we don't want to do that, so I'm going to switch it back to import this bone. You can also control the parent of a bone that you import. So over here we have a menu that shows both the footman bones and the new incoming entangling roots bones because we're combining the models. And as you can see with, like, for example, cylinder 8 right here, or cylinder 10, they will disappear off of that list if we choose do not import. And then the other bones, as they're choosing a parent node, will no longer see cylinder 8 because cylinder 8 is no longer being imported into the footman model, so you cannot link to it as your parent node. Again, in our case, we're just going to import all of these nodes because we want to keep the animation of the entangling roots roughly the same. We're just going to bake it into the footman model. Then you have the matrices tab here, which effectively is the bone attachment groups. Interesting names. I called it matrices because that's what it's called in the text-based MDL format of a Warcraft model. But as you can see here, it's very similar. It shows different portions of the model and which bones they're linked to. Most of the time, I don't change anything in this menu because you can accomplish most of what you want to do using just the Bones tab, bringing in new elements or overriding existing elements with the data of the nodes in the imported model. So, in our case, we could skip over the Matrices tab, but as it says there in the tooltip, controls which bones geosets are attached to. Then you have the Objects section. Now, sometimes for a unit model, this is relatively large because this is really anything in their node structure, and it lets you choose whether to import that or not, and what the parent of that node ought to be. So in our case, there's a little green particle effect. You may have seen the entangling roots has a little sort of green sparkling light that comes off of it so that you know it's a spell effect that you can choose whether to import or leave behind as we import into the footman model. There are also the event objects, which are the sounds the roots make as they grow up out of the ground, and we can choose whether to import those or not. For the trained model developer, you will know that these various sound event objects are linked internally to a time. One or more entries, basically, that specify when to play that sound. You may notice that here during this import function, we don't have any immediate control of when that sound will play, which seems like it would be a significant issue. However, the issue is resolved by the Animation tab. Because it's either timescaling animation onto existing footman animations, or importing in a new animation entirely, it will duplicate or translate entries in the time track for these sounds that play based on those animation tab choices. So that if I take this stand animation, as we did, and if one of these sounds happens to play during the stand animation as a entangling roots sort of looping sound, that looping sound will be merged into every single one of these footman animations that I have chosen to move the stand animation of entangling roots into. In practice, I don't think entangling roots has any looping sounds because it would be somewhat annoying, but it does have a birth and death sound, which I think would be the two we see here. So let's go ahead and import these sounds and import the birth animation of the entangling roots as something totally separate from the rest of the footman's animations, which introduces a sort of interesting conflict here because we're simultaneously overwriting footman animations and introducing new animations with the bones of our entangling roots. So, to resolve that conflict, we have a new question. If I've chosen to add to the footman an animation of entangling roots growing out of the ground, and to also blend in passively animating the entangling roots as though they were grasping something into all of the footman's animations. Which of those animations will the footman be visible during? Will we see the footman's geometry during the birth animation that we are creating in the footman model? Or will that geometry not be visible? That leads us to the Visibility tab, the sixth and final tab in the Matrix Eater's import function. This tab basically breaks down everything you have chosen to import in the model up to that point. But so in our case, we have the Stranglevines layer, which is a texture file. It's shortened the name, so this is a BLP texture. It has a longer path name inside Warcraft that we just are currently not concerned with. But we know it's that texture that we saw on the front page here, Stranglevines, that was originally and still is going to be the mesh surface of the entangling roots and the geometry, the roots themselves. So we see that here, and we can choose to animate when it's visible. In our case, it was already always visible. There was no alpha channel that was like no animated alpha channel on that material. And I don't think we want an animated alpha channel on that material because in our case it would be unnecessary. So by leaving both of these as always visible, we avoid introducing unnecessary animated alpha channels. What we do want to control is the geosets. So here we see that the entangling roots geoset was originally always visible in the entangling roots model. Even as it grows back into the ground, it just shrinks or moves under the ground and does not actually disappear. So here we have an interesting choice. Do we want it to be invisible at any time during the footman's animations? In our case, because we're merging it into all of the footman's animations, we probably just want it to always be visible. But what if we changed our mind? What if we said that during the footman's decay animations, we no longer wanted there to be entangling roots baked into that footman model, so when he decayed on the ground, there were no longer roots? If we wish to accomplish that, you can see I just control-clicked these two entries so that they're no longer selected. And now there are some footman animations that will no longer have animation data from the entangling roots model. For that, we can choose the existing animation visibility from in the entangling roots model. And this will be existing in the sense that it is existing already in the footman model. And we could say not visible. Now that means animations that have no entangling roots specific data that were existing in the footman model, so in this case decay flesh and decay bone, will now be specified to have the entangling roots geoset 1 that we're importing not be visible. However, in imported animations, so in entangling roots animations, those roots will still always be visible. If you ever have a case of a conflict, when there's an animation that is merging and is both, you have this checkbox which will choose whether to favor the component's original visibility when combining them. This actually is happening in our case because we're merging entangling roots stand animations into the stand and the walk and the other animations of the footman. So it's important that we've left this checkbox checked because this says that the entangling roots, in those cases of conflicts of visibility, will prefer its own original visibility settings. Likewise, we also have the question of what to do with the entangling roots birth animation, which the footman has no data for. It's very, very similar to the decay animations we just thought about, except that now there's no data in imported animations. So we can choose to say not visible for the footman's geosets in those imported animations. Now, if you want to affect all of them, you can shift-click all 5 footman geosets, and here it says multiple selected, but you can still click to edit it, and we can change it to not visible. Now, if you click through them, every single footman geoset will not be visible in animations that existed only in the imported model, so in our case, the birth animation of entangling roots. Last but not least down here, we have the particles that we brought in for entangling roots, and I would argue that we want those to be not visible in existing animations, just the same as we did the roots of the entangling roots, because we don't want to see them during the decay animations of the footman when there are not supposed to be roots visible. So we can shift-click both of them and choose the not visible option, and it should make sure that none of the roots or the entangling roots' data will be visible or show up during the footman's decay animations. Now at this point, we've just entered a lot of settings. If we click Finish, we should be able to see the instant results of what our model looks like. Immediately, you can see present in the viewer, it updates with entangling roots now wrapped around that footman, just like we would expect. But to actually view animations, we would need to use other software, such as the Warcraft 3 World Editor. Now here we are in the Warcraft 3 World Editor with the model that we just created. Now, as we would expect, the Matrix Eater has blended the stand animation of entangling roots directly into the footman model, and in every single one of the footman's animations, we see the roots right there. An interesting technical result of this operation is that the speed at which the roots animate is relative to the length of the footman animation that we imported them into, because it's just directly a linear scaling of the keyframes of that animation when it blends into each of the footman's models, or each of the footman's animations. So you can see here, for example, Stand Defend, which is an animation that's only 1 second long, has the entangling roots grasping at the footman once per second, because it merged that animation, the keyframes in that time track, to directly line up to the footman's 1 second of Stand Defend. Another very interesting case here, as we go through these footman animations, most of them, we did that shift click that hit a lot of them. There's the birth animation. Now, if you look at this, the birth animation of the entangling roots does not show the footman in it. That was because of our choice in the visibility tab to not display the footman in imported animations. And the footman did not previously have this birth animation. Other than that, in Decay Bone and Decay Flesh, we see that the entangling roots are not present because we chose not visible in existing animations for that mesh as we imported it into the footman. With that, this demonstrates the Matrix Eater's most notable and interesting feature, its ability to import one Warcraft 3 model into another one, including all components and all aspects of the model. And I thank you for watching this technical demonstration and hope you have a good day.